Welcome, Lewis, and great to chat with you today on the exciting topic of DeepSeek, and specifically diving into the world of the DeepSeek R1 model. So, Lewis, as you know, DeepSeek has appended the AI industry over the last few weeks with the R1 model, which the company says can roughly match the performance of OpenAI's O1 model at a fraction of the cost. And although there's been some doubt over DeepSeek's claims that it only cost $5.6 million to train, nevertheless, it has released the model. It's open source and it's available for all to use. So, in fact, what I've seen is its mobile app was, for a while there, one of the most popular in the App Store. So, Lewis, I know you've downloaded the model and you've been evaluating it a bit. Tell me a little on what your initial thoughts are on DeepSeek and what they've released so far.
Sure. Well, DeepSeek R1 is an open source model that rivals the OpenAI O1 model in complex reasoning tasks. They have released the original model, smaller fine-tuned models, and a research paper on how they did it. Unfortunately, they did not release the training data and neither the code. However, the paper is detailed enough to reproduce their innovative approach. The DeepSeek R1 model is big one, is 671 billion parameters model. However, they have released, as I mentioned before, several distilled, what they call distilled, but it's a fine-tuned, small, dense models that perform very well on known benchmarks. Those smaller models are the DeepSeek R1 Quen 1.5 billion parameters, 7 billion parameters, 14 billion parameters, and 32 billion parameters. And they also released the counterpart from Llama, the DeepSeek R1 Llama 8 billion parameters and 70 billion parameters.
That's great. And let's also cover how someone who wants to try it out and get started. So what's the easiest way for a beginner to test DeepSeek R1? What kind of hardware do they need? Are there cloud-based options for those who want to try to run it locally, who don't want to run it locally, rather?
Well, the good thing is that all these models are available in quantized versions, so smaller versions in Hugging Face, making them very easy to download and test locally, even on laptops with limited RAM. You can use tools like LM Studio or Llama, VLLM, and etc. Particularly, the small Llama or Quen fine-tuned versions are good to fit, that would fit in your laptop, in your memory, in your RAM. So those are the recommendations for your local test.
Let's now deep dive a bit more into how this model is different. So what I like about the R1 model is the way it can reason and learn from other models. It's also good to see its thought process as it answers questions. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, when reading through the paper, the story is the following. The DeepSeek researchers first, they train a model called DeepSeek R1 Zero, which is unique because they applied pure reinforcement learning without relying on supervised fine-tuning as a preliminary step. Basically, DeepSeek R1 Zero teaches itself how to solve complex problems without any supervised learning data. This self-evolving approach allows the model to develop advanced reasoning skills like self-verification, reflection, and generating detailed thought process, what we know as chain of thought, making a significant milestone in artificial intelligence development. The DeepSeek R1 Zero model faced some issues related to readability and language mixing. For that reason, they have used a pipeline composed of two reinforcement learning stages and two supervised fine-tuning stages, and then they train what we know as DeepSeek R1. Shortly after the paper was published, as always, very fast, Hugging Face and Onslaught released a full open source, easy to use reproduction of the DeepSeek R1 pipeline, which is fantastic.
Obviously, its open source nature is a big win. But beyond that, what stands out? And I know you mentioned Onslaught, which has done some impressive work on optimizing these models. How does that help with fine-tuning and the efficiency of this model?
First, DeepSeek models are fully open source under MIT license, but the training data and code, as I previously mentioned, remain undisclosed. Secondly, DeepSeek R1 demonstrates great performance in reasoning tasks by discovering effective problem-solving strategies on its own. Its ability to achieve high scores on challenging benchmarks, such as matching top performing models in mathematics and coding competitions, showcases its advanced capabilities. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, the model's reasoning patterns can be distilled into smaller, efficient versions, making powerful AI accessible even on devices with limited resources. This not only benefits the research community, but also opens up possibilities for practical applications across various industries.
So we know DeepSeek R1 is strong in reasoning, but what specific industries or use cases will benefit the most? For example, can businesses leverage this for automation, or is it mainly suited for research and development?
Well, now the model will be particularly helpful in fields that require complex reasoning and problem solving. It excels in, as I said before, in mathematical reasoning, coding challenges, and scientific analysis. This means it can assist engineers, educators, software developers, and researchers by providing solutions to difficult problems, generating code, analyzing data, and enhancing knowledge uh, retrieval and academic purposes. As previously mentioned, the model training pipeline is reproducible, which these open opportunities for companies to experiment, creating their own versions of the model to attempt to solve specific problems. I have seen in the last weeks, just one last comment. I've seen in the last weeks many companies and also many open source libraries with new ideas, new ways how to use this. For example, reinforcement learning approach that they use in R1. So that's fantastic. Opens many doors to companies.
Thanks, Luis. So we've talked a lot about the benefits of DeepSeek R1, but no model is perfect, as we know. So what, in your view, are some of the biggest areas for improvement? Are there any specific limitations that developers and businesses should keep in mind, they should be aware of before integrating this model into their workflows?
Sure. Well, I will just stay in what they mentioned in the paper. Okay. So basically, they mentioned that some areas are requiring improvements, such as general capability of DeepSeek R1 compared to DeepSeek version 3, the one that they released previously before R1, particularly in tasks like function calling, multi-turn conversation, complex role playing, and generating JSON output, where R1 currently falls short. They also highlighted issues with language mixing, as I mentioned before, as DeepSeek R1 is optimized for Chinese and English, but may respond in English even when queries are in other languages, leading to potential confusions. Additionally, they observed that DeepSeek R1 is sensitive to prompt engineering, using few shot prompting, for example, that we normally use to improve performance. They mentioned that using few shot prompting can degrade its performance, so they recommend zero shot prompting for optimal results. Lastly, the model, the R1, hasn't demonstrated significant improvement in software engineering tasks due to training challenges affecting reinforcement learning efficiency. And future versions aims to address this by enhancing the reinforcement learning process. So, Dax, I have a question for you. It's regarding security. So, how does it stack up from a security perspective? This model.
Good question. So, from my own personal analysis with DeepSeek R1, I was able to get it to provide harmful responses fairly easily, certainly a lot easier than the OpenAI models. And while I've not done a comparison against OpenAI, there are others who have. In fact, there was recently an audit done by an AI security company, Holistic AI, and that showed that DeepSeek R1 was more vulnerable to jailbreaking compared to the OpenAI's O1 model. So in their tests, while OpenAI achieved about, or the O1 model achieved about 100% safe responses in their jailbreak attempts, DeepSeek R1 only managed 32%. And I know there was also a recent study or report released by Qualys, who are a respected security vendor, that tested DeepSeek's R1 Llama 8B variant and found that across their 16 categories of questions that check for things like vulnerabilities, ethical concerns, legal risks, the R1 model had a 61% failure rate. So sometimes it was providing dangerous outputs, such as instructions for creating like bombs and explosive devices or generating hate speech. So this is very much my experience as well. It is not robust to jailbreaking attempts, but it is fairly new as a model.
Fantastic. And now my last question: what are governments such as the Australian government? Why are they banning the use of DeepSeek on employee devices?
And that's another great question. So DeepSeek's AI privacy policy basically stipulates that all user data is stored on servers located in China. So that creates a bit of a red flag. It raises some critical concerns due to China's regulatory environment and similar to the concerns some governments have actually around TikTok. So these concerns mainly affect organizations that are using DeepSeek's model uh, uh, hosted in models. But you can always deploy these models in the local or customer control cloud environment, which mitigates regulatory risks and allows more secure access. Also allows enterprises to maintain full control over the data governance. So, despite this, I think the model's inherent security vulnerabilities still are a valid concern. It does require careful evaluation and mitigation. So that's it. Let's wrap it up here. Thanks, Luis, for your views on the R1 model. No doubt this isn't the last video we've seen on DeepSeek, and look forward to more to come. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm Dax from AI Unlocked, and if you've enjoyed this conversation, let us know. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you. Bye.